I love you. Not her. The billionaire's confession left his fiancée in tears. This story might change the way you think. There was a woman who spent 2 years cleaning floors in a mansion she could never afford to even visit as a guest. There was a man who had everything money could buy, except the one thing he actually wanted. And there was a wedding that was supposed to happen in 3 weeks. What none of them knew yet was that one single sentence, spoken out loud in a marble hallway under a crystal chandelier, was about to change all 3 of their lives forever. This is not a story about money. This is a story about what happens when the heart refuses to follow the plan. Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we tell real, raw, emotional stories about love, loss, and second chances. The kind of stories that stay with you long after the video ends. So before we begin, tell me, which country are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, I'd love to know. Today's story is about a maid, a billionaire, and the fiancé standing between them. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll be asking yourself what you would have done in her place. Let's get into it. It started on a Tuesday morning that felt like every other Tuesday morning. Maria Alvarez was 34 years old, and she had been cleaning the coal estate in Greenwich, Connecticut for almost 2 years. She woke up at 4:45 every morning in a small rented apartment above a laundromat, kissed her sleeping 8-year-old daughter Sophia on the forehead, dropped her off at her mother's place, and drove 40 minutes to a house that was bigger than the entire block she lived on. The coal estate had 14 bedrooms, a private lake, and a staff of 11. Maria was one of 3 housekeepers, but she was the one who worked the East Wing, the wing where Ethan Cole actually lived. Ethan Cole was 34 years old too, though you would never have guessed it from the way people talked about him. Forbes called him the quiet billionaire. Wall Street called him the closer. His late father's real estate and technology empire, Coleridge Group, had tripled in value since Ethan took over 5 years ago. He was the kind of man magazines wanted on their cover, and the kind of man his own mother worried had no life outside a boardroom. He was engaged to Vanessa Whitmore. Vanessa was 30 years old, sharp, beautiful, and came from a family whose name sat 2 floors above Ethan's on the New York Social Registry. The engagement had been announced 8 months ago at a gala that made the front page of 3 papers. Everyone said it was perfect. A merger of empires. A love story written in headlines. Nobody in those headlines mentioned that Ethan Cole hadn't smiled, not really smiled, in longer than he could remember. Maria noticed it before anyone else did, because noticing things was her job. She noticed which rooms he actually used and which ones were just for show. She noticed that he ate breakfast alone at 6 a.m., long before the house officially woke up, and that he always left half of it. She noticed that when Vanessa visited, the house got colder somehow, even with the heating on. And one morning, she noticed something else, a folded photograph tucked behind a drawer in his study while she was dusting. It was old, edges soft from handling. A little boy, maybe 8, sitting on the shoulders of a man who wasn't dressed like a billionaire's father at all, just a man in a plain flannel shirt, laughing. She hadn't meant to look. She put it back exactly where it was and never mentioned it. But something about that photograph stayed with her the rest of the day. That same morning, Ethan came down earlier than usual and found her in the study, straightening the last of the books she'd dusted. "You don't have to finish before I get back," he said. It wasn't cold. It was just quiet, like most things he said. "I like finishing what I start, Mr. Cole," she said, not looking up. He almost smiled at that. Almost. "You've been here 2 years," he said. It wasn't really a question. "Yes, sir. And in 2 years, you've never once asked me for anything." Maria paused, cloth still in her hand. "Should I have?" "No," he said, and this time something in his voice cracked just slightly, like a door left open half an inch. "That's exactly why I noticed." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and he left for his office 15 minutes later without another word. That night, driving home past the gas station where she sometimes had to choose between filling the tank and buying groceries, Maria told herself the same thing she told herself every night. This is a job. He is your employer. Nothing more, nothing less. Sophia needs you healthy, employed, and sensible. Not distracted. She almost believed herself. 3 miles away, in a house with 14 bedrooms and not one single photograph of his father on display except the one hidden in a drawer, Ethan Cole sat at his desk long after the lights should have gone out, staring at a wedding invitation proof his assistant needed approved by Friday. He didn't call Vanessa that night, even though he knew he should. He kept thinking about a woman who finished what she started, who never asked him for anything, and who, for reasons he couldn't explain to himself, was the only person in that entire enormous house who ever made him feel like maybe, somewhere underneath the empire, there was still a person left. He had no idea yet how much that single thought was going to cost him, or how much it was going to give him back. Because 3 weeks from that night, in that same house, under that same chandelier, everything was going to change, and nobody, not Ethan, not Vanessa, and not Maria, was ready for it. Nobody becomes a maid in a billionaire's mansion because it was their childhood dream. Everybody has a reason. Maria's reason had a name, and her name was Sophia. 8 years ago, Maria had been a nursing student in her final year, engaged to a man named David who worked construction. They had a plan. She'd finish her degree, he'd save for a down payment, and in 5 years they'd have a small house with a yard for the kids they wanted. Then David didn't come home from a job site one afternoon. An accident. A crane cable that should have been inspected and wasn't. Maria was 7 months pregnant at the funeral. She never finished her nursing degree. There wasn't time, and there wasn't money, and grief doesn't care about either. For 8 years, she'd worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs at once, cleaning offices at night, waiting tables on weekends, until a cleaning agency placed her at the coal estate. The pay was better than anything she'd had before. The hours were long, but predictable. And for the first time since David died, Maria could put a little money aside each month instead of just surviving. Her mother, Carmen, watched Sophia most days after school. Carmen had a heart condition that worried Maria more than she let on, and medication that cost more every year, no matter how many times the pharmacist apologized about it. "You work too hard," Carmen told her almost every evening. "I work exactly hard enough," Maria always answered, which wasn't really true, but it was the answer that let them both go to sleep. Ethan Cole's reason for the life he lived had a name too, and it was his father, Richard Cole. Richard hadn't started with billions. He'd started with a single failing apartment building in Queens and a stubborn belief that people deserved decent places to live for a fair price. He built Coleridge Group slowly, honestly, one property at a time, and he never once let success make him forget what it felt like to count coins for the subway. He died of a heart attack when Ethan was 26, 3 years into Ethan's job at the company, and the board had panicked and practically shoved the CEO chair under him before the funeral flowers had wilted. Ethan had spent 8 years since then trying to be worthy of a chair he never asked to sit in. He worked 18-hour days. He said yes to every merger that made the balance sheet stronger and no to almost every dinner invitation that might have made him happier. Somewhere in those 8 years, he had stopped being Richard Cole's son and started being Cole. A name on a building, a name in a headline, a name Vanessa's family found extremely attractive to attach to their own. He told himself the engagement made sense. Vanessa was intelligent. She understood his world without needing explanations. Her father's real estate holdings paired beautifully with Coleridge's. On paper, it was the smartest decision he'd made in years. On paper. The problem was that Ethan had started noticing things he had no business noticing. The way Maria hummed softly to herself when she thought no one could hear, some old song her mother used to sing. The way she always left a small folded note on his desk on the days his housekeeper reminded staff it was a hard meeting day. Just 3 words, "You've got this," with no signature, because she never wanted credit, she just wanted him to have one person in that whole house who was rooting for him as a person and not as a paycheck. He started coming down for breakfast at the same early hour she cleaned the study, not because he needed to, but because those 15 minutes had somehow become the calmest 15 minutes of his entire week. One morning in early spring, it rained hard enough that Maria's car, an old sedan with over 200,000 miles on it, wouldn't start in the estate staff lot. She was going to be late picking up Sophia and stranded besides, and she stood there in the rain for a full minute trying to figure out which bill she could delay to pay for a tow. Ethan happened to be leaving for a 9 a.m. meeting in Manhattan when he saw her. He didn't send a driver. He drove her himself, in the rain, in a car worth more than her apartment building, and he didn't say a single word about it being unusual, because to him, in that moment, it didn't feel unusual at all. It felt like the only decent thing to do. "You don't have to tell anyone about this," Maria said quietly, staring out the window, mortified and grateful in equal measure. "I wasn't planning to," Ethan said. "But not because it's a secret. Because it's not anyone else's business." She looked at him then, really looked, and for one dangerous second, something passed between them that had nothing to do with an employer and an employee. It was gone as fast as it came, buried under thank yous and see you tomorrows, but it left a mark on both of them, the kind of mark that doesn't show up until much later, when it's too big to ignore. Neither of them said anything about it again. But 3 days later, when Vanessa came for a dinner planning session and asked Maria, without even looking up from her tablet, to just leave the wine glasses, the housekeeper before you knew how I like them arranged, a small, careless correction that made Maria feel about 2 inches tall in the house she cleaned every single day, Ethan noticed the way Maria's shoulders dropped for just a second before she straightened them and said, "Of course, He noticed. And for the first time in 8 years, Ethan Cole started to wonder if he had built the entire second half of his life on the wrong foundation entirely. He had no idea that in less than 2 weeks, he was going to find out exactly how wrong, and exactly how right, one decision could be. The truth came out the way most truths do, sideways, uninvited, and at the worst possible moment. It was a Thursday afternoon, 11 days before the wedding, and Ethan was in his home office reviewing the final merger documents that would combine part of Coleridge Group's downtown portfolio with Whitmore Holdings, Vanessa's family company. His lawyer, an old friend named Marcus, had flown in from Chicago to walk him through the fine print in person, which should have been Ethan's first clue that something was off, because Marcus never flew anywhere for paperwork that could be emailed. "There's a clause I need you to actually read, not skim," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the desk. Section 14. Ownership Transfer Contingencies. Ethan read it twice before he understood what he was looking at. Buried in the legal language was a clause stating that if the marriage between Ethan Cole and Vanessa Whitmore did not take place, or ended within 18 months, controlling interest in the merged downtown portfolio, nearly 40% of Coleridge's most valuable real estate holdings, would default to Whitmore Holdings. "This isn't a marriage," Ethan said slowly. "This is an acquisition with a ceremony attached." "I need to know if you already knew about this," Marcus said carefully. "I didn't." Ethan's voice was flat. "Who signed off on this language?" Marcus hesitated. "Vanessa's father pushed it through your corporate counsel 2 months ago. Under a different section title, so it wouldn't jump out. Your VP of Legal flagged it to me privately last week because he didn't feel right sitting on it." Ethan sat back in his chair, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something other than exhaustion. He felt genuinely, quietly furious. He didn't confront Vanessa that day. He wanted proof of what she knew, not just what her father had arranged, so he waited, and 2 days later, he got it, completely by accident. He'd stopped by Vanessa's Manhattan apartment to drop off a signed vendor contract for the wedding florist, and her assistant, thinking it was fine because Mr. Cole practically lives here, let him in and told him to just leave it on the kitchen counter. Vanessa was on a video call in the next room, door half open, and Ethan heard his own name before he heard hers. "No, he still hasn't noticed Section 14, my father made sure it was buried," Vanessa was saying, laughing lightly, the kind of laugh reserved for people who think no one important is listening. "Honestly, even if the marriage falls apart in a year, we still walk away with the downtown properties. Either way, my family wins. That's the whole point of doing it this way instead of just buying the portfolio outright. It's cheaper, and it looks like love instead of a hostile takeover." There was a pause, and then she added, almost bored, "Ethan's sweet, don't get me wrong. He's just a means to an address book and a stock price. I could never actually fall for someone that boring." Ethan stood completely still in the kitchen, contract still in his hand, and something inside him that had been slowly cracking for months finally broke clean through. He left without saying a word. He didn't trust himself to speak yet. He drove home in silence, and when he walked through the front doors of the Greenwich estate, the first person he saw was Maria, standing at the base of the staircase with a stack of freshly pressed linens, looking at him with a kind of instant concern that comes from actually paying attention to a person's face. "Mr. Cole, are you all right?" He almost said fine, the automatic answer he'd given 1,000 times to 1,000 people who didn't actually want the real one. But something about the way she asked, like the answer genuinely mattered to her, not as an employee checking on an employer's mood, but as one exhausted human being checking on another, made the automatic answer stick in his throat. "No," he said instead, quietly, honestly, for what felt like the first time in years. "I don't think I am." Maria set the linens down on the hallway bench without a second thought and simply stood there, present, saying nothing, letting the silence be enough. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't pry. She just stayed, the way she always stayed at whatever task was in front of her until it was actually done, except this time, the task was him. They stood in that hallway for almost a full minute without a single word passing between them, and it was, without question, the most honest minute Ethan Cole had experienced in 8 years of running an empire. "Thank you," he finally said. "For what?" Maria asked. "I didn't do anything." "You stayed," Ethan said. "That's more than most people manage." He walked upstairs after that, and Maria picked her linens back up and finished her rounds, telling herself firmly that whatever had just happened in that hallway meant nothing, that a sad, tired man saying thank you to the person who happened to be nearby was not the beginning of anything. She was wrong, and some small, quiet part of her already knew it. Because 11 days before his wedding, Ethan Cole had just discovered that the woman he was about to marry saw him as a line item on a balance sheet, and the woman who cleaned his floors had, without even trying, shown him more genuine care in 60 seconds than his fiancée had shown him in 8 months. He didn't know yet what he was going to do about either fact. But he knew, with a certainty that scared him, that he could no longer pretend not to know them. Everyone thought they knew how this story would end. They were completely wrong. For the next 4 days, Ethan said nothing to Vanessa about what he'd overheard. He told himself he was being strategic, gathering his thoughts, deciding the right way to handle Section 14 and everything underneath it. In truth, he was stalling, because the moment he confronted her, the wedding, the merger, the headlines, the version of his life everyone expected him to keep living, would be over, and Ethan Cole had spent so many years doing what was expected that he genuinely didn't know how to do anything else. Then, on the 5th day, something happened that made the decision for him. Carmen, Maria's mother, collapsed at home. Maria got the call at 7 a.m., mid-shift, from a neighbor who'd heard Sophia screaming and called 911 before calling Maria. By the time Maria reached the hospital, hands shaking so badly she'd nearly hit 2 cars on the way, Carmen was stable, but the doctor's face told her everything the medical terms tried to soften. Her mother's heart condition had progressed further than anyone realized, and the specialist she needed, the surgery she needed, was going to cost more money than Maria could raise in a lifetime of double shifts. Maria called the estate to explain she wouldn't be in, voice cracking despite every effort to keep it steady, expecting at best a sympathetic "take the time you need" from the house manager and at worst a note about how this would affect her hours. 2 hours later, Ethan Cole walked into the hospital waiting room himself. Maria stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her coffee. "Mr. Cole, I'm so sorry. I know I should have called sooner, Maria," he said gently, using her first name for possibly the first time ever without a Ms. in front of it. "I'm not here about work." He sat down beside her, in a plastic hospital chair, In a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and fear, a billionaire in a $2,000 coat surrounded by people whose entire worlds had also just tilted sideways, and he stayed. He stayed for 6 hours. He didn't try to write a check and disappear, though he quietly, without fanfare or announcement, arranged for Carmen's cardiologist to be flown in from Boston that same evening and made sure the hospital billing office would never send Maria a single invoice for any of it. Details he mentioned only once, in passing, almost embarrassed by his own generosity, as though he were apologizing for something rather than giving a gift. What Maria remembered most, though, wasn't the money. It was that when Sophia, 8 years old and terrified, came out of the family bathroom with red, swollen eyes, Ethan Cole, a man Forbes described as quiet and unreadable, knelt down to her exact height and said, "Your grandma is one of the toughest people in this hospital right now, and the doctors here are some of the best in the country. You did the right thing calling for help." That took real courage. Sophia, who had no idea who this man was beyond Mommy's boss, climbed straight into his lap and cried into his expensive coat, and he simply held her and didn't move for 20 minutes, while Maria watched with her hand pressed hard against her mouth, trying and failing not to fall apart completely. It was the single kindest thing anyone had done for her family since David died. Late that night, after Carmen was stabilized and resting, after Sophia had finally fallen asleep across 2 waiting room chairs, Maria walked Ethan to the parking garage, unable to find words big enough for what she wanted to say. "I don't know how to thank you for this," she said finally. This is too much. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Ethan said simply. "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it, sharper and more honest than she intended. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, looking at her under the flickering garage lights, and when he finally spoke, his voice had none of its usual careful boardroom control. "Because in 8 years of running the biggest deals of my life, nobody has ever once asked me if I was okay and actually meant it, except you, in a hallway, 11 days ago." He looked down, almost embarrassed by his own honesty. "And because watching you with your daughter tonight, watching you fight for the people you love without hesitating for even a second. I think it's the most genuine thing I've witnessed in years. Maybe ever." Maria's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Mr. Cole, you're getting married in 10 days. "I know," he said quietly. "I found out 4 days ago that the woman I'm marrying sees this wedding as a business acquisition with better catering. I have known you for 2 years, and in that time, you've shown me more real care than she has in 8 months of an engagement." He shook his head, almost laughing at the absurdity of his own life. "I'm not telling you this to put anything on you. I'm telling you because I think I finally understand what I've been missing, and I owe it to both of us to be honest about it instead of walking into a marriage that's already a lie." Maria stepped back, overwhelmed, terrified of how much she wanted to step closer instead. "I need to go check on my mother," she said, and it was true, and it was also an escape. Ethan nodded, understanding, not pushing. "Take whatever time you need. Your job is safe. Your family is my priority right now, not mine." He drove home alone that night with the truth sitting heavy and undeniable in his chest. He was going to have to end his engagement, not because of Section 14, not because of what he'd overheard in Vanessa's kitchen, but because somewhere in the last 2 years, without ever meaning to, he had fallen in love with the one person in his enormous house who had never once wanted anything from him at all. He just didn't yet know how, or when, or in front of how many people, that truth was finally going to come out. Silence can say more than words ever could, and for the next 6 days, silence was exactly what filled the Cole estate. Carmen was recovering well, the Boston specialist confirming the surgery had gone better than expected, and Maria returned to work 3 days later, insisting she needed the routine and, quietly, the paycheck her family now needed more than ever. She and Ethan didn't speak of the hospital, or the parking garage, or the words he'd said under those flickering lights. Both of them, for very different reasons, were terrified of what would happen if they did. Vanessa, meanwhile, was in full wedding week mode, utterly unaware that anything had shifted. She'd hired a wedding planner named Delphine who spoke almost exclusively in exclamation points, and the Greenwich estate had slowly transformed into a staging ground for what the society pages were already calling the wedding of the decade. White orchids arrived by the truckload. A string quartet rehearsed in the ballroom. 240 guests, including 3 sitting senators and a former Secretary of the Treasury, had confirmed attendance for an engagement gala being held 1 week before the actual wedding. A gala that had, somehow, ballooned into an event nearly as large as the wedding itself. Ethan moved through all of it like a man watching someone else's life happen to him. He'd tried, twice, to sit Vanessa down and end things properly, privately, with the dignity the situation deserved despite what he now knew about her true feelings. Both times, she'd been surrounded by planners, or family, or phone calls with her father, and both times Ethan had lost his nerve, telling himself he'd try again after this week calms down. A lie he was becoming uncomfortably good at telling himself. The truth was, Ethan Cole, who negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, was terrified of the fallout. Ending things now, publicly, this close to the wedding, would be humiliating for everyone, would tank Coleridge stock overnight when the merger fell through, would hand Vanessa's father every headline he could ever want about the unstable Cole heir, and, worse, selfishly, privately, might make Maria feel exposed and blamed for something that was entirely his own decision to make. So instead, he waited. And the waiting cost him. For nights before the gala, Ethan found Maria in the East Wing library at nearly 10 p.m., long after her shift should have ended, carefully reshelving a box of old books that had come down from the attic for cleaning. "You're here late," he said. "Couldn't sleep at home," Maria admitted. "My mother worries when I sit still too long. Figured I'd finish something useful instead." Ethan picked up one of the books from the box, an old, worn copy with a cracked spine, and something in his chest tightened. It was one of his father's books, a construction and urban planning text Richard Cole had kept for decades, notes scribbled in the margins in his father's handwriting. "He used to read this to me," Ethan said quietly, almost to himself. "Not because an 8-year-old cares about zoning law, but because he wanted me in the room while he worked. He said the best thing you can build a life on is honesty with the people around you, that everything else is just architecture." He set the book down carefully. "I don't think I've honored that in a very long time." Maria watched him, something aching in her chest. "Mr. Cole, whatever is happening between you and Ms. Whitmore, it's not something you have to figure out standing in a library with me at 10 at night." "I know exactly what's happening between me and Ms. Whitmore," Ethan said, and his voice had an edge of finality to it she hadn't heard before. "I've known for over a week. I'm ending it. I should have ended it already, and the only reason I haven't is because I've been a coward about the timing." "Then end it," Maria said softly, and the words cost her something too, because ending it meant something for both of them, and she knew it. "I will," Ethan said, and stepped just slightly closer, close enough that Maria's heart climbed straight into her throat. "But I need you to know something first, because I've spent 2 years not saying it, and I'm done not saying things that matter." He paused, and the library was so quiet she could hear her own pulse. "I'm not ending things with Vanessa because of a legal clause, or because of what I overheard in her kitchen. I'm ending things because somewhere in the last 2 years, in a house with 240 guests confirmed for a wedding I never actually wanted, the only person who ever made this house feel like a home instead of a headquarters was you." Maria's eyes filled without permission. "Ethan," she said, using his first name for the first time ever, and the word alone felt like crossing a border she couldn't uncross. "I clean your floors." "I'm not." "You are the most honest person in this entire house," Ethan said. "That has never had anything to do with what job title someone gave you." Neither of them moved closer. Neither of them moved away. They simply stood there, in a library full of a dead man's books about honest architecture, both fully aware that whatever was happening between them was no longer something either of them could pretend not to see. "The gala is in 4 days, Maria finally whispered. "I know," Ethan said. "People are going to get hurt." "I know that too," he said, and his voice was steady, certain, in a way it hadn't been in years. But I'd rather hurt people telling the truth than keep protecting a lie that was never going to make anyone happy, including Vanessa. Maria didn't have an answer for that. She simply nodded, gathered her things, and left the library, walking out into the cold Connecticut night with her heart pounding harder than it had in 8 years, since the last time she'd let herself believe, even for a moment, that love might actually be possible for her again. Neither of them knew that the gala Ethan was planning to survive quietly, end privately, and explain later was about to become the exact opposite of quiet, private, or later. The night of the engagement gala, the Cole estate looked like something out of a fairy tale, which, considering what was about to happen inside it, was almost too fitting. 240 guests arrived in a steady stream of black town cars, the driveway lined with lanterns, the ballroom glowing gold under 3 crystal chandeliers. Vanessa, in a dress that had reportedly taken 4 fittings and cost more than Maria's annual salary, moved through the crowd like she'd been born for exactly this moment, laughing at the right jokes, air-kissing the right cheeks, glowing under exactly the kind of attention she'd always wanted. Ethan stood beside her for photographs, smiled when the photographer asked him to, and felt like he was watching the entire evening from somewhere just outside his own body. He had told himself he would wait until after the gala to end things. One more night of peace before the storm, he reasoned, though really it was one more night of cowardice dressed up as consideration. He had not counted on Maria being asked to help serve in the main house that night because 2 of the catering staff had called in sick, a last-minute scheduling decision made by the house manager that neither Ethan nor Vanessa had any hand in and neither of them knew about until it was already happening. He saw her across the ballroom around 9 p.m., in a simple black uniform instead of her usual pale purple, carrying a tray of champagne through a crowd of people who didn't see her at all, the particular kind of invisible that comes from being staff in a room full of guests who've been trained their whole lives not to notice service workers as people. Ethan noticed. He always noticed, when it came to her. He excused himself from a conversation with a state senator and crossed the ballroom, and for one brief, foolish moment, he simply wanted to talk to her, the way he had in the library 4 nights ago, away from the noise, away from the version of his life currently laughing too loudly by the ice sculpture. "You didn't have to work tonight," he said quietly, catching her near the edge of the hallway just outside the main ballroom doors. 2 people called in sick. "Somebody had to," Maria said, trying to keep her voice light, professional, safe. "I'm almost done with this tray, then I'm heading home." "Maria." His voice cracked on her name in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne he hadn't touched all night. "I can't do this. I can't stand up there in 3 weeks and marry someone knowing exactly what I know, feeling exactly what I feel." "Ethan, not here," she whispered, glancing anxiously back toward the ballroom. "Not tonight. Please." "I know it's not the time," he said, setting her tray down on a side table without thinking, his hands finding hers instead. "I know it's the worst possible night. I know everything about this is wrong except the one thing that actually matters, which is that I am completely, hopelessly in love with you, and I have been for longer than I've been brave enough to admit." Maria's breath caught, tears rising fast and unstoppable. "You don't mean that. You're overwhelmed, the wedding, the stress, your father's book, my mother in the hospital, it's all just." "I mean every word," Ethan said, stepping closer, his forehead nearly touching hers, his hands holding hers like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. "I love you." Not her. "I have never once said those words to Vanessa in 8 months, and I say them to you without even having to think about it." Maria closed her eyes, one tear finally slipping free, her hands trembling in his. "Ethan, Neither of them heard the ballroom doors open behind them. Neither of them heard Vanessa's heels on the marble, coming to look for her fiancé because a toast was about to be given and the room was waiting. They only realized someone was there when they heard the sharp, horrified gasp, a sound that stopped every other sound in the world, and turned to see Vanessa Whitmore standing frozen in the hallway entrance, one hand pressed hard against her mouth, her carefully perfect makeup already ruined by the first fast tears of what was, without question, the single most humiliating moment of her entire life. "Ethan," she said, voice shaking, barely above a whisper. "What is this?" The music from the ballroom drifted faintly down the hallway, absurdly cheerful against the wreckage unfolding in front of it. Ethan didn't let go of Maria's hands. He didn't step back. He didn't reach for an excuse, a cover story, a version of events that might soften what Vanessa had just witnessed. He simply looked at the woman he was supposed to marry in 3 weeks, and told her the truth. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly, and the 2 words carried more weight than anything he'd said in the 8 months of their engagement. "I should have told you this privately, days ago, and I take full responsibility for the fact that I didn't. But you deserve to hear the truth, even if this is the worst possible way to hear it." He took a breath, and his voice, though shaking slightly, did not waver from what he had to say. "I love you, not her." He nodded toward Maria, whose hands were still trembling in his, whose face had gone pale with a kind of fear that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with what this moment could cost her. Her job, her reputation, everything she'd built to protect her family. Vanessa's voice cracked completely, disbelief and fury colliding. "You're standing here, in my engagement gala, holding hands with the maid, telling me you love her." "Her name is Maria," Ethan said, steady despite everything. "And yes. Do you have any idea what you're doing right now?" Vanessa's whisper rose fast into something closer to a hiss, glancing anxiously back toward the ballroom, where the string quartet had just finished a song and 240 guests were one open door away from witnessing exactly this. 200 people are in that room. Senators. Ethan. My father is about to give a toast. "I know," Ethan said. "And I would rather every single one of them know the truth tonight than watch me stand at an altar in 3 weeks lying to you, to them, and to myself." Vanessa's eyes flicked to Maria, sharp and cutting. "And you? 2 years cleaning his floors and you just decided you're in love with him? Do you have any idea how this looks? How pathetic this looks?" "Don't," Ethan said, his voice suddenly hard in a way that surprised even him. "Whatever you're angry at me for, and you have every right to be angry at me, you do not get to say a single word to her. She didn't ask for any of this. I did this. This is on me." "On you?" Vanessa laughed, a broken, humiliated sound. "You know what's on you, Ethan? Section 14. My father's clause. You think I don't know you found out? You think I don't know why you've been avoiding me for 2 weeks? Her composure cracked further, months of careful performance dissolving into something rawer and more honest than anything she'd shown him in 8 months. "You want to talk about truth? Fine. Let's talk about truth. That engagement was never about love, and we both know it. But at least I never stood in a hallway pretending to care about you while planning our wedding invitations upstairs." "You're right," Ethan said quietly, and the admission seemed to take something out of the fight in front of him. "It wasn't about love for either of us, in the beginning. That's exactly the problem. I let it go on for 8 months because it was convenient, because it was expected, because ending it felt harder than continuing it. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry for every part of that. But somewhere in those 8 months, without meaning to, I found the thing I was supposed to be looking for all along, and it wasn't in that ballroom. It's standing right here." The ballroom doors opened at that exact moment. A guest, later, no one could quite agree who, had wandered toward the hallway looking for the restroom and stopped dead at the sight of the room's hosts, one in a designer gown ruined by tears, one holding hands with a woman in a catering uniform. Word travels through a room of 240 people faster than any headline ever could. Within 90 seconds, the string quartet had stopped playing entirely, and half the ballroom had drifted, wine glasses in hand, toward the hallway to see for themselves. Vanessa's father, Harold Whitmore, arrived first, face thunderous, immediately grasping the shape of a scandal that was about to cost his company far more than Section 14 was ever going to gain it. "Ethan Cole," Harold said, voice booming with the particular fury of a man watching a business deal collapse in real time. "You will explain yourself right now." "I already did," Ethan said, turning to face the growing crowd of guests, senators, and society photographers who had, unfortunately for everyone's careful public image, already begun quietly recording on their phones. "I love this woman." He didn't let go of Maria's hand, even as she tried, gently, desperately, to pull it free, terrified of what this moment was about to do to both their lives. "And I am not marrying Vanessa Whitmore in 3 weeks, or ever." Somewhere in the crowd, a camera flash went off. By morning, it would be everywhere. The headline hit before sunrise: "Billionaire's Confession. Coleridge CEO calls off wedding for the maid." By 8 a.m. it had 300,000 shares. By noon, it was on every major morning show, dissected by anchors who had never met any of the 3 people involved but had strong opinions about all of them anyway. For Maria, the fallout was immediate and brutal in a way she had feared far more than Ethan had understood in the heat of that hallway. The cleaning agency that employed her received 2 calls before 9 a.m., one from a Whitmore family lawyer threatening legal action for workplace misconduct, and one from a tabloid offering her money for an exclusive interview about seducing a billionaire. She was placed on unpaid leave pending review by noon, a polite phrase for something that felt a great deal like being fired for the crime of being loved by the wrong person in front of the wrong crowd. Reporters found her apartment by that evening. 2 of them knocked on her mother's door, still recovering from surgery, asking Carmen questions about her daughter that made the older woman's blood pressure spike badly enough that Maria had to call the doctor just to be safe. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Maria said to Ethan over the phone that night, voice tight with exhaustion and fear, Sophia asleep beside her on the couch after a day of confused questions about why strange people kept knocking on their door. "You didn't just blow up your own life in that hallway, Ethan. You blew up mine. And I never asked you to." "I know," Ethan said, and he sounded, for the first time since she'd met him, genuinely lost. "I wasn't thinking about what it would cost you. I was only thinking about not lying anymore. That was selfish of me, and I am so sorry." "I have a daughter," Maria said, and her voice broke. "I have a mother who just had heart surgery. I cannot afford a scandal, Ethan. I cannot afford reporters at my door and no paycheck and a tabloid calling my daughter's school asking for comment. Do you understand that? This isn't a boardroom mistake you can fix with a merger. This is my entire life." "I'll fix it," Ethan said immediately. "I'll call the agency, I'll call the lawyers, You'll what?" Maria's voice, for the first time, had real anger in it, not at him exactly, but at the impossible gap between his world and hers, a gap that the events of the last 24 hours had made painfully, undeniably clear. "Throw money at it, the way you throw money at everything? That's not the same as understanding what it actually costs someone like me to have my name in every paper in the country." She hung up before he could answer, and Ethan sat alone in his enormous, echoing house, the wedding decorations still half standing in the ballroom, orchids already beginning to wilt, 240 guests' worth of gifts still stacked in a side room nobody had touched, and understood, with a clarity that hurt more than any business failure ever had, that loving someone honestly and loving someone well were not automatically the same thing. He had done the first. He had badly failed at the second. Vanessa, for her part, disappeared from public view entirely for 4 days, then resurfaced with a single statement released through her family's publicist, dignified and devastating in equal measure. "I am heartbroken, but I would rather know the truth about someone's heart before a wedding than after one. I wish Ethan well, though I confess I wish it took him less than 8 months and 200 wedding guests to discover it." Harold Whitmore, for his part, was already quietly moving to trigger Section 14 through legal channels. The marriage hadn't happened, and the contract's language, he argued, still technically applied. Coleridge stock dropped 9% in 2 days on the uncertainty. Ethan's board called an emergency meeting. His mother called him crying, not with anger, but with worry that her son had somehow inherited every ounce of his father's stubborn honesty without any of his father's patience for consequences. Ethan spent 3 sleepless nights fighting battles on every front, legal, financial, corporate, and none of it touched the one battle that actually mattered to him, because Maria wasn't answering his calls, and he couldn't blame her. On the fourth night, he showed up at her apartment above the laundromat, alone, without security, without an assistant, in jeans instead of a suit for the first time Maria had ever seen, and knocked on a door he had absolutely no right to expect her to open. She opened it anyway. "I'm not here to fix anything with money," Ethan said, standing in the narrow hallway outside her apartment, rain soaking through his jacket because he hadn't bothered with an umbrella. "I know that's what you think I do, and honestly, you're not wrong that it's my instinct. But I'm here because I owe you an apology I should have given you 4 days ago, before I said a single word to Vanessa." Maria stood in the doorway, arms crossed, exhausted, guarded in a way that broke something in him just to see. "Ethan, it's late. Sophia's asleep." "I'll be quick," he said. "I need you to know that I understand now what I didn't understand in that hallway. I was so focused on not lying to myself anymore that I didn't stop to think about what the truth would cost you. That was thoughtless and privileged, and exactly the kind of mistake someone makes when they've spent too many years assuming the world adjusts around their decisions instead of the other way around." He took a breath. "You were right to be angry with me. You're allowed to still be angry with me. But I am not going anywhere, and I am not going to let my carelessness be the reason your family suffers, even if you never let me anywhere near your life again." Maria's arms slowly uncrossed, though her guard didn't fully drop. "What does that even mean, Ethan?" "It means I called off the corporate response team, and I met with the cleaning agency myself, in person, this morning," Ethan said. "Not to threaten them. To ask them, plainly, to reinstate you immediately, with back pay, and to make clear that any retaliation against you would be met with real legal consequences, because what happened to you was workplace discrimination dressed up as review. It's done. You have your job back if you want it, though I understand if working in that house again is the last thing you want." He continued before she could respond. "It means I've hired a private security consultant, at my expense, not to control you, but to make sure no reporter gets near your mother's door or Sophia's school again, for as long as this story stays interesting to anyone." He paused. "And it means Section 14 no longer matters, because I've already agreed to let Whitmore Holdings take the downtown portfolio without a fight. My lawyers think I'm insane. My board thinks I'm insane. But I would rather lose 40% of a real estate portfolio than spend one more day pretending that contract was ever about anything other than control." Maria stared at him, rain dripping steadily off his jacket onto her doorstep, and something in her chest, guarded for 8 long years since David died, cracked open just slightly. "Why would you give up that much money for a legal fight you might have actually won?" "Because my father built an empire on the idea that the best foundation for anything is honesty with the people around you," Ethan said quietly. "I spent 8 years forgetting that. I'm done forgetting it." He looked at her, rain-soaked and utterly sincere. "I'm not asking you for anything tonight, Maria. Not an answer, not a relationship, not even forgiveness. I know I have no right to any of that yet. I'm just asking you to know that what I said in that hallway wasn't the panic of a man having a breakdown at his own engagement party. It was the truest thing I've said out loud in years, and I would say it again in front of 2,000 people if I had to." Maria was quiet for a long moment, the rain filling the silence between them, and when she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than he'd ever heard it. "Do you have any idea how frightening it is to fall for someone who could destroy your life with a single headline, Ethan? I have spent 8 years building the smallest, safest, most careful life I could, because Sophia needs me steady more than she needs me happy. Loving you is not safe. Loving you is the opposite of everything I have worked for." "I know," Ethan said. "And I'm not going to pretend that's not true, or ask you to pretend it's not true either. All I can tell you is that I will spend as long as it takes proving that loving me doesn't have to mean losing the life you've built. I'm not asking you to trust that tonight. I'm asking for the chance to earn it." Maria looked at him for a long moment, rain-drenched and humbled on her doorstep, A man who had given up 40% of a real estate empire and every ounce of his careful public image in the same week, and felt something inside her. Something she'd kept locked tight since a crane cable snapped 8 years ago. Begin, slowly, cautiously, to open. "Come inside before you catch pneumonia," she said finally, stepping back to let him in. "But Ethan, this doesn't fix everything. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time." "I know," he said, stepping through her doorway into the small, warm apartment that felt, somehow, more like a home than his 14-bedroom estate ever had. "I'm not asking for tonight to fix everything. I'm just asking for tonight to be the start of trying." It took 8 months, not one single dramatic night, for Maria Alvarez to fully believe that Ethan Cole's love for her wasn't going to disappear the moment the tabloids found something new to talk about. He didn't rush her. He didn't show up with grand gestures every week trying to buy back the trust his carelessness had cost. Instead, he did something far more convincing. He simply stayed steady, month after month, showing up for the small, unglamorous things that actually build a life. Sophia's school recitals, sitting in a folding chair in a gymnasium instead of a boardroom. Carmen's follow-up appointments, driving Maria's mother himself when Maria's old sedan finally gave out for good, and quietly having it replaced with something reliable, not flashy, because he'd learned, finally, the difference between generosity and control. Sunday dinners at Maria's small apartment, where he learned to make his own coffee instead of having it made for him, and where, 6 months in, Sophia started calling him Ethan instead of Mommy's boss, which meant more to both adults in that kitchen than any headline ever could. Coleridge Group survived the loss of the downtown portfolio, restructured under new leadership priorities Ethan set personally, focused, in a way his father would have recognized, on fair housing developments instead of maximum shareholder value. The stock recovered within a year. The story recovered slower, as these things do, but eventually, the billionaire and the maid stopped being a scandal and quietly, gradually, became something else in the public imagination. A love story people actually rooted for, once they saw it wasn't a headline stunt but a real, patient, unglamorous kind of devotion. Vanessa Whitmore, for her part, ended up better off than anyone expected. Freed from a marriage that was never built on love in the first place, she took over a division of her father's company she'd always wanted to run and, 2 years later, married a man who looked at her the way Ethan had never once managed to. Like she was the whole point, not a merger opportunity. She and Ethan never became friends exactly, but the last bitterness between them faded into something closer to mutual, weary respect. A year and a half after that rain-soaked night on Maria's doorstep, Ethan proposed. Not in a ballroom, not with 200 guests, but in the Greenwich Estates library, surrounded by his father's old books, Sophia hiding, badly, behind a bookshelf to watch, Carmen crying happy tears in the doorway. "I'm not asking because it makes sense on paper," Ethan said, kneeling in front of the woman who had once told him she liked finishing what she started. "I'm asking because for the first time in my entire life, I don't want the paper to make sense. I just want you." Maria said yes with tears streaming down her face, and this time, when the story hit the papers, it wasn't a scandal, it was a headline the whole country seemed happy to cheer for, because by then, everyone understood exactly what it had cost both of them to get there, and exactly why it had been worth it. If there is one thing this story teaches us, it's this. Love that's built on honesty is never convenient, and it's rarely easy, but it is always, always worth more than a lifetime built on a comfortable lie. Sometimes the truest thing in your life is standing right in front of you, in a uniform instead of a gown, asking for nothing at all, and sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is finally say it out loud, no matter who's listening, no matter what it costs. If this story moved you even a little, that's exactly why we make them. If you believe in love that's built on truth instead of convenience, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need it. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one, because we've got so many more stories just like this one waiting for you. And if someone in your life needs a reminder that it's never too late to choose honesty over comfort, send this one to them. Thank you for staying until the very end. We'll see you in the next story.